You were a police officer back in 1967. Could you give your perspective on what happened on this day 50 years ago?
50 years ago this day, and probably at this time, I was in the heat of all the things that were going on. The weather was similar. It was extremely hot. It was humid. But we had loads and loads of people on the street who were looting. Some were just spectators. But we had at that time probably, I think, 5,500 police officers. And of that 5,500 police officers, we had probably 100 or less who were African American. But it was such an incredible time. Some people were enjoying the spectacle of what was going on. Others were looting. But it was a very difficult time for everyone because of the fact that we had assumed in Detroit that this wasn't going to happen, that things were okay. And eventually I worked for then Mayor Kavanaugh, but people assumed that this wasn't going to happen. But the police department, unfortunately, was woefully unprepared to handle the situation of things that occurred in 1967.
What do you think that was?
Well, the police department had assumed that everybody was happy, but they did not and had not looked at what had occurred that precipitated this particular series of incidents. That we had horrible police community relations. We had horrible relationships with the black community in particular. A lot of people had been beaten up. I was one of those people in 1957 who was severely beaten up by the police and made a decision I was going to become a police officer. And this was commonplace in Detroit for the Detroit Police Department. And in fact, it was probably in around that time that the NAACP attempted to integrate the police department, and the police department went on what was called a blue flu, which in essence was a strike. And so we had all these things that were occurring, and there had been a number of people, probably in the 50s and early 60s, who had been shot or killed by the police. So all these things festered, in addition to, Pedro, that we had a great number of people who moved up from the South, who wanted to get jobs here in Detroit because of the Big Three, and they found that things were probably as bad here as they were in the South. So they were really frustrated in terms of the things that were going on.